In a previous video, I mentioned that I was trying to work my way through the Western canon by starting as far back as I could with the ancient Babylonian or ancient Mesopotamian texts. And that brings me to today's book, Ludlul Nemeqi. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but that's the name of the book. So this is the standard Babylonian poem of the righteous sufferer. If you're interested, you can get it as part of the Neo-Assyrian Text Corpus Project here. This is Volume 7. I got this through interlibrary loan. I was checking Amazon, and Amazon appears to be out of stock of it. But hopefully, if you're interested, you can find it somewhere, maybe through your local library. If you are also interested in embarking on this project and reading the classic works of ancient Mesopotamia. So, as always, I am going to be approaching this as a non-expert. This is the first time I've read this. I'm not an expert in ancient Babylonia. I'm just on a journey here. So the purpose of this video, I guess, is to, one, just reflect on my reading. Two, maybe make people aware that this book exists if you want to track it down yourself. And then maybe three, invite discussion. If anybody wants to comment, let me know what I missed, let me know what I got wrong, let me know what I got right, etc. But here we go. This is the standard Babylonian poem of the righteous sufferer. Now, you might notice right away that this is a Babylonian poem, but this edition is from the Neo-Assyrian Text Corpus Project. So the book itself, it does have a rather useful introduction, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the book itself actually doesn't address why this Babylonian poem is part of the Neo-Assyrian Text Corpus Project. But I think I know what's going on here. And I'm drawing on this book here, Assyria by Eckhart Fromm, which I've also talked about on this channel, which indicates that Babylon and Assyria had a very interconnected culture. They apparently had a similar language. Although the Assyrian Empire was before the Babylonian Empire, Babylon as a civilization, not as an empire, but as a civilization, was very old. And I guess Assyria got a lot of its culture from the Babylonian civilization, and Assyria got a lot of its classical texts. The Assyrian literary canon was imported from Babylon. And also according to this book, at one point Assyria compiled a great library in Nineveh, which was destroyed, but which archaeologists have been able to find the remains of. And so I believe a lot of the classic Babylonian texts come from the Assyrian documents or the Assyrian Empire. So I think that's what's going on here. As always, someone correct me if I'm wrong. So this book was a classic both in the Babylonian era and in the Assyrian Empire. It says somewhere in the introduction here, I don't remember exactly where, but it says somewhere in the introduction that because of archaeological evidence, we know that this text was widely read and widely copied in the ancient world, and it was part of their canon. I think they say anyone who was educated in the ancient world would have been familiar with this text. So this text is the standard Babylonian poem of the righteous sufferer. It comes up very often in biblical studies. And in fact, I believe one of the introductions to the Old Testament that I read actually talked about this text in connection with the book of Job, because the general themes of this book parallel the themes of Job from the Bible, the book of Job. And some people even say, I believe, that the book of Job may have been influenced by this book. And that's there are some Christians who don't like that claim because obviously that indicates that the Bible is derivative and not directly from God. But yeah, I believe that's a claim that's occasionally advanced. And certainly in the broad strokes, you can see the similarities. So, like the book of Job, this book describes a righteous man who is suffering divine punishment for no apparent reason. So for some reason, which is never given, the god, in this case it's Marduk, not the Hebrew god, but the Babylonian god Marduk, has become displeased with this man. Now this man, much like Job, is a righteous man. He apparently has done nothing to warrant this divine wrath, but he is suffering this divine wrath nonetheless. In the first tablet, he suffers loss of wealth and loss of social position. In the second tablet, he suffers from the loss of his health. Just like in the story of Job, Job first loses his riches and then later on suffers health problems. So that's a parallel. And then in the third and fourth tablet, he is restored to health and restored to his former position, and the god Marduk is again pleased with him, just like Job is eventually restored to his position at the end. And just like in the book of Job, the god Marduk really doesn't give any accounting for himself of why he's done this. It's just, you suffer because the gods want you to suffer. What are you going to do? So that is also the takeaway from the book of Job. So as you can see, there are a lot of similarities here in the broad strokes. Now, I read the book of Job back in January and reviewed it on this channel. So it's somewhat fresh in my mind. It's a few months in the past, but relatively fresh in my mind. And I did not see any direct parallel passages between this Babylonian text and the book of Job. And if they were there, then I missed them. I didn't remember them. But as far as I can remember, aside from those broad thematic similarities, it doesn't seem to be that the author of the book of Job was copying directly from this. It seemed just like those broad thematic similarities were there. Now, I mentioned before that both in this book, this text, and in the book of Job, we get a very unsatisfying answer for why the righteous person is suffering. And in my discussion of the book of Job, I complained about that at length. I mentioned that I expected, because the book of Job had a reputation for giving philosophical answers to why good people suffer, I expected the book of Job to have a philosophical answer for why good people suffer, but it just was not in the book of Job. The takeaway at the end was, you suffer because God gets to do whatever he wants. That was essentially the answer at the book of Job. And in this book as well, we do not get a theological answer. And in the introduction, the translators go on to explain that in ancient Mesopotamian literature, that was the theme. The philosophical tradition of trying to explain why God does what he does, or to justify God's actions, apparently does not come later. That does not come until later, until maybe the Christian era, apparently. In the Mesopotamian era, you just remarked on the suffering, but you didn't try and rationalize it. And in the footnote here, they give a quote. In his justification to limit the term's applicability to philosophical discussion, he writes, this is the guy they're referencing, works like the book of Job, or we might add Ludlul, Ludlul is the present text, do not offer philosophical justifications of God or even accounts of his justice, slamming the door in the face of human demands for the intelligibility simply cuts the knot. So Yeah, that makes me at least understand a little bit better why the book of Job didn't attempt to offer any philosophical justification for suffering. So yeah, recognizing it in that tradition, I guess, makes me more understanding of it. There is some interesting stuff in this poem, though, and this is, again, here from the translator's introduction. They say that the text contains what must now be considered the earliest recorded statement of seminal agnosticism. And as an agnostic myself, this is close to my heart. So let me just read this here. This comes from Tablet 2. What would I knew these things were acceptable to the God? That which is good to oneself may be a sacrilege to the God. That which is stretched to one's heart may be good to one's God. Who can learn the plan of the gods in the heavens? Who understands the counsel of the deep? Where did humanity learn the divine decree of the gods? Now, it appears to me when you're actually reading through the whole text that the author of this never doubts the existence of gods, or doubts the existence of Marduk, his god. But he is saying, well, okay, there are gods, but who knows what they want? How do we humans have any clue what the gods want or what they're thinking? And that is, a philosophy that I would find kindred to my own. Maybe there are gods, but who has any idea what they want? Oh, okay. Moving on. It's also stated here in the introduction that this is supposed to be less a philosophical text than a religious text. So at the end of the text, tablets 3 and 4, we find that despite all the suffering of the righteous sufferer, Marduk comes back and rehabilitates him. So the final parts of this tablet are just praises to Marduk. The suffering is forgotten at this stage. It's just, oh, isn't Marduk so great for ending my suffering after Marduk caused my suffering? And so it says, Ludlul should be considered alongside other Marduk glorifying texts, perhaps most importantly, Enuma Elish. So the Enuma Elish, for regular viewers of this channel, that's the text I discussed in the previous video. So back again to the Enuma Elish. And as I learned from this edition here by W.G. Lambert, the Enuma Elish was written in part, or in large part, I guess, to theologically establish the supremacy of Marduk over the other gods. So this here, again, is less a philosophical text maybe than establishing Marduk's supremacy. So, like I said, I am not an expert on any of this. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. But as a reader, I can talk about this text just from the perspective of a reader. So there's an introduction, which is good. Short but good. A readable introduction. They talk about the reconstruction of the text. And again, one of the things that I'm learning as I'm getting into these ancient Mesopotamian texts is that we are still in the process of reconstructing them. We are discovering new tablets all the time, or decoding the tablets that we already have. So even though they are only in fragments now, our fragments are getting more and more complete all the time. And they mention that the previous edition of this, published by W.G. Lambert, who is the compiler of the Babylonian creation myths, which I just talked about in the previous video, he had published a critical edition of this, but since that time, more tablets have come to light, and we now have a fuller view of what the whole text is. So I guess this is the text as we currently have it. In another 20 years, who knows what it'll be like. The details on the reconstruction of the text are probably not of interest to the casual reader. It was not of interest to me. But their interpretation of it is interesting. And then they talk about the themes of the Babylonian poetry here. Now, again, I don't actually read the original language. So this is interesting to me up to an extent, but they mostly talk about it in ways that can be understood in English translation. So they talk about the voice, they talk about the parallelism and how it's in couplets and the different types of the different types of parallelism that can be recognized even in the English translation. Semantic parallelism, grammatical parallelism, lexical parallelism, and like I said, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it was interesting to read this and notice how much of this seemed to be similar to the Bible. The types of couplets and the types of parallelism and the types of repetition, which is recognizable in the poetic books of the Bible. And I'm sure that there's a lot already written about the similarities between the Bible and Mesopotamian poetry. So I felt that this introduction not only helped me to understand the poem better, but also to understand the Bible and maybe Mesopotamian literature in general. Now, there is presented here some notes on the tablets, which for the casual reader like myself, I just skipped over. And then you better believe I skipped over this. I'm sure this is interesting to the specialist. For the casual reader like myself, I just skipped right over that. And then there's the transliteration, which is the cuneiform text given in Roman letters, which again, because I am not a scholar and I don't read Akkadian, I just skipped right over this. And just went right to the English translation. Which is completely readable. So, if you skip ahead to page 31, there's an English translation here. It's readable. There's a lot of repetition here, which again was explained in the introduction, the parallelisms that's going on in terms of this poetry. Some of that repetition caused my mind to wander a little bit. I had to struggle a little bit to stay focused on the text. But the introduction helped me to understand what the author was doing, and it was not too bad at all. Occasionally I had to remind myself to focus, but for the most part this was highly readable. And it's very short. Tablet 2, already went to tablet 3, tablet 4 here. So the main text of this poem is it's less than 15 pages here. And, it's a little bit more with the introduction here. But if you skip over all the stuff that's in Akkadian and is not readable to the layperson, this is actually a very short read. So for better or for worse. I always usually think of it as a positive when something's a short read. I get to tick another classic off my list without having to put too much effort into it. So if you're of that mindset, this is a nice, easy classic to tick off very easily. I don't know if I would recommend spending money on this for the casual reader. And like I said, it doesn't seem to be available on Amazon anyways. I'll leave a link in the description down below to the Amazon page for this. But last time I checked, they didn't have any copies in stock anyways. I'm not sure if that would change in the future. But if you can track this down through interlibrary loan or something, it might be interesting for anyone who is interested in, well, ancient history or ancient Mesopotamia or Babylon or Assyria or biblical studies or any related field. You find this interesting, I think.